Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. We will get started in just 1 minute. We might still have a few more people joining us, but thank you all for participating. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started now. I wanted to welcome you all to this webinar again. It's the result of a lot of collaboration, and we're happy to be sharing the results of our consultations that we did previously. So thank you all for joining. I wanted to first begin with the technical details of this. So everyone on the call, you will see that at the bottom of the Zoom screen, there is an interpretation button. It has a globe around it. If you click on that, you will see 4 different languages are available. So we have English, French, Spanish, and Arabic. Arabic is labeled as Korean. However, that is incorrect. It's a Zoom glitch. So if you would like the Arabic channel, please click on the Korean button. I know that does not seem right, but that's how we are labeling Arabic today. Also, you'll see to the left of interpretation a Q&A function. Please feel free to put in any questions that you have before or throughout the entire webinar. And the chat function you'll see as well, just a few more buttons over to the left. Please feel free to use this to introduce yourself. I will also introduce myself as well. So my name is Michelle Martillera, and I work with the Canadian Red Cross, and I'm a member of the Women, Peace and Security Network Steering Committee. And I will be moderating our webinar today. So I welcome all of you here. And I did want to begin by having a land acknowledgement. I'm calling in from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, so in the Ottawa region currently. And I think it's important to acknowledge this land. It's an opportunity for us to reflect on not only the impacts of colonialism, which has certainly affected First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in Canada and continues to, but it's also a way for us to recognize our Indigenous history and to keep that in mind, as reconciliation is an extremely important part of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. It's important in Canada, and I also think in many other countries around the world. The Women, Peace and Security agenda will not advance if we still have Indigenous women who are suffering around the world. So this is just one starting point in terms of a land acknowledgement, but it is one small way for us to be accountable to Indigenous people, to Indigenous women, and to recognize and appreciate the Indigenous women who are still fighting for their own peace and security. So I see that a few of you have started introducing yourselves in the chat box. I certainly encourage everyone to do that. It will be great to see who is here. I believe we also have a poll that we'll be sharing shortly so that you can indicate sort of what you're representing here at the webinar. I'll go through now the objective of our webinar today. It's a way to not only hear from the Women, Peace and Security Network co-chairs, so we have representatives from the Government of Canada and from the Government of Uruguay here today. So to hear their perspectives as focal points on engaging civil society and their reflections on the network's accomplishments. But we also have a really great opportunity to hear from Women Peacebuilders from around the world. So we have 3 incredible panelists today who you'll also hear from, and they participated in our civil society consultations that we held earlier this year in August, And they were able to share some of their own recommendations and reflections for the Focal Points Network so that they can take the WPS agenda forward. After that, we'll share some of the recommendations that we gathered and that we put together in a report, which has now been launched today. And then we'll have a Q&A for all of you so that we can hear from you, answer any of your questions, and make sure that our participants now are engaged. And then finally, we will have a wrap up from Canada's Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, Jackie O'Neill. So thank you, everyone. So I'll start now with an introduction with our first speaker. So we're starting with some of our representatives from government, and they play a key role in the Focal Points Network in order to advance the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And the Women, Peace and Security, or WPS Focal Points Network, represents over 80 states that have committed to advancing the WPS agenda. And this year in 2020, Canada and Uruguay are co-chairs of that network. So it's an exciting time to advance a lot of the commitments that have been made. So first, I would like to introduce Gwen Coots. Gwen Coots is the Canadian focal point to the WPS network, and she's the Director General for Peace and Stabilization Operations Programs at Global Affairs Canada. So Gwen, could you give a few remarks and share your reflections on engaging civil society?
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm delighted to see how many people are attending this session today. First off, allow me to take this opportunity to recognize the tremendous collective efforts of our civil society partners over the course of these past few months to develop this set of priorities and recommendations for the Women, Peace and Security Focal Points Network. Congratulations on bringing together a really impressive and diverse group of civil society perspectives from all over the world to contribute to these recommendations, and I hope that we've got good representation from around the world today. So Canada has been very pleased to have provided some financial support to enable you to develop these recommendations. And together with our co-chair, Uruguay, we are committed to strengthening the collaboration and the integration of civil society within the WPS Focal Points Network in 2020 and going forward. Looking back 20 years, UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and the WPS agenda simply could not have been achieved without the strong and concerted efforts from civil society. In 2020, we recognize our civil society partners' continued efforts and dedication to seeing the vision of the WPS agenda become a reality on the ground for women and girls around the world. Just going to let the translators catch up. As member states, we count on you, civil society members, to continue to accompany us and to hold us to our commitments to WPS in 2020 and into the future. We very much value your passion and the drive to see the agenda become a reality around the world. We consider that we are richer for these partnerships with you, and we do rely on these open and honest conversations to ensure that our actions as governments are making a real difference. Not always easy to accomplish. So in the series of online discussions with the WPS focal points and civil society experts that we've organized so far in 2020, we've heard loud and clear that an effective response to COVID-19 pandemic and our recovery strategies must fully integrate the WPS agenda. We've also heard about the importance of recognition, protection, and support for women peacebuilders in all of their diversity, who face tremendous challenges as they carry out their work under normal circumstances, and these challenges we've seen have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So Canada and Uruguay, as co-chairs of the Focal Point Network, we share the view that strong civil society engagement is crucial to making real progress and to identifying practical, concrete action to advance the agenda. The priorities that you're sharing today will help to inform upcoming events of the Focal Points Network in 2020 and in the years to come. These events will include a high-level leaders dialogue to mark the 20th anniversary of UNSCR 1325, which we are working to organize during the WPS Open Debate Week. Canada and Uruguay are developing the program for that event together with our fellow network Troika members, Switzerland, South Africa, and Namibia. So stay tuned for details for this online event coming up later this month, since we're already into October. But this is our time to listen to you. So we are listening and we are acting, and Canada will continue to demonstrate our strong commitment to the WPS agenda, both at home and in all of our foreign policy efforts. So I'm looking forward to hearing your recommendations very much, and I welcome our fellow WPS Focal Points who are joining us for this important conversation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gwen. That was a really great overview. And I think from the civil society side, we've really welcomed the opportunity to engage on this issue. And the ongoing engagement with Global Affairs Canada has been great on this as well. And now I'll turn it over to Noelia Martinez-Franchi. She is the Director of Multilateral Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Government of Uruguay, and she is also the Uruguayan WPS Focal Point, so co-chairing with Canada this year, and has also been instrumental in advancing the WPS agenda in 2020. So Noelia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello from Uruguay to all the participants of the webinar, and a special thank you to WPSC for inviting me to join in this virtual gathering. It's an honor to address these welcoming words and to have the privilege to hear you firsthand, just as Ambassador Jacqueline O'Neill mentioned a few days ago. To be a keynote listener is also a true pleasure for me. To hear you talking about the great efforts you've made, so many persons, so many organizations from civil society to consolidate your work, and we're looking forward to learning. It's also a great pleasure to do this alongside Ambassador Gwen Kutz, who has built a great team in Global Affairs Canada. We've been working together as co-chairs of the focal points because we are standing for all women who are working today and who deserve to be represented. On our side, you need to know that without your daily effort, without the lessons learned from you, without the fact that you are now grounding us, our work would be contentless and even purposeless. That's how we feel. This is why your contributions today, after the broad consultation process you've gone through, will be of unsurmountable value as to accelerate the WPS agenda. And I would like to confess that in Uruguay, as part of the global network, as part of the focal points, we will pay close attention to our speakers today as to reinforce our commitment to the analysis to try to incorporate and to adapt the recommendations extended by you for the domestic implementation of the agenda throughout our action plans. All of us who have been engaged in the agenda's implementation knew this year would be a great opportunity because it was the 20th anniversary of UNSCR 1325, and we wanted to put it as the cornerstone of all of our efforts. However, Our initial plans and perspectives shifted with the COVID-19 pandemic, although it did not reduce the interest and engagement to the call of action that gathers us here today. We know the current situation did make things more difficult, especially for women in the front line, because conflicts are now more severe and the pandemic has had a major toll on the most vulnerable. Women human rights defenders are now mostly exposed, and the implementation of this agenda has become increasingly complex. Nonetheless, this has still forced us to become more creative, to be more flexible, and perhaps even more resilient. We believe acting in an innovative and proactive way is what you all need. And as when mentioned, that's what we have had to print to our collaboration, and believe these lessons learned will become part of the new normal. And we hope the civil society and the government will be able to further interact into the future. I salute all the participants, the focal points meeting us today, summoned in this webinar, and we're looking forward to your comments and to the recommendations you will extend. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Noelia. I think those remarks from Noelia and Gwen are a great introduction to the next portion of our webinar. And that's where we actually get to hear from some women peace builders and women from civil society in different regions from around the world and hear their reflections on a few questions. And I think this is one of the most important parts of the process of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. It's incorporating the reflections, the thoughts, and the calls to action from women peace builders around the world. So with that, I thank both of our previous speakers, and I would like to introduce our next session. I will also remind everyone, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A box. That's where we'll be checking for the questions to our panelists and to our speakers. So next, I will introduce Christine St. Pierre. Christine is also a member of the Women, Peace and Security Network Canada Steering Committee, and she's a trainer and advisor on women, peace and security issues. She will be the moderator for the next segment here.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here and sharing with us this very important discussion. I will introduce our three panelists with whom we will have a discussion on women, peace and security, their perspectives and priorities for going forward. Our first participant is Eunice Jacob Francis from South Sudan. She is a project officer at Crown the Woman, which is a woman-founded and woman-led non-profit, non-governmental, non-political, humanitarian and national grassroots organization that aims at empowering girls and women to ensure they harness their potential and contribute to nation building economically, socially, and politically. Our second participant is Dr. Maria Al-Abdey. She is the Executive Director of Women Now for Development, which is a Syrian non-governmental organization that aims to engender the development of society governed by democracy, freedom, and justice, a society where women have a meaningful role in everyday Syrian life, and she is based in Berlin. And last but not least, Cecilia Lazara is from Argentina. She is a research and advocacy intern for the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders Latin America programs. She is also pursuing a Master in Global Affairs at New York University with a concentration on international development and humanitarian assistance and a specialization in global gender studies. Welcome to you three, and thank you. All of you have taken part in our consultations this summer, so we're extremely honored to have you again to have this discussion today. So we thought we would start with a first question in terms of your reflections on the progress over the last few years and over the course of your work regarding the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And, you know, from your country perspective or region, and also, you know, understanding that so much has happened in 2020. So if we can start with sharing those initial kind of reflections. So perhaps I can start with Eunice.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Yes. Thank you for the introductions, Christine. And as she introduced me, I am Pichiko Eunice. The other name is very hard. I work with Crown the Woman. I'm a project officer for a peace building initiative. It's being supported by Search for Common Ground and UN Peacebuilding Fund. The project that I run is called Strengthening Young Women's Participation in the Local and National Peace Processes. And from the title, you can just see that it is strengthening young women's participation in all the peace processes that we have in this country. Our country is, can I say, relatively new, because it's like 10 years independence. We just got our independence of recent, and I'm really happy that I'm honored to be a part of this panel and to discuss about women, peace and security, because this is a crucial thing in our country, especially with women's peace and security. And as Christine shared with you, we are working towards young women's growth and encouraging them and voicing their opinions in this country. The reflections, my reflections on the progress regarding peace and security agenda in my country or region, I would say it's fairly being implemented, because in the 1325, it says that we have to, it says that the governments have to involve women in peace processes, and the civil society has really pushed for that. We have the 35 affirmative action in South Sudan. At first, it was 25 as affirmative action. That's the percentage of women to participate in peace processes or in any peace building or decision-making processes in the country. The civil society, women of this country fought hard, and they're like, 25 is not enough. And they went and spoke out in the peace the peace agreements that took place in Addis Ababa, and it was increased to 35%. So the 35 is there, but I would say 35 is not being managed well, because with the percentage that we have right now in peace process or women in political spaces, the percentage is 26.1. And where is the 8.9% that women have to take up? I would say it's a recurring thing. Women are still voicing out their opinions. Each day they're coming out stronger and stronger with different communiques, different letters addressing issues that concern this country. And the other, regarding peace and security of women, I would bring it in this, when we signed our peace agreement, in our chapters, there are 8 chapters, and one of them is talking about the security reform, and where there is the DDR, disarmament, demobilization and reintegration of the police and army. But in that they are women too and children. This has not been put into consideration. Last week we were speaking with the first justice in South Sudan, Justice Ajonye. She clearly said and stated of how when she went out to a different part of the country, she realized that when they were disarming these men so that they can be trained to become a unified force, women were not given priority. Women are lacking a lot of things, like simple things like sanitary pads, where to stay, soap. Women are not being put into consideration, and she's not the only one, but women are that side are calling out for them to be represented too, because they are also part of the army, and they're not alone, they have their children. And this is now bringing a bad image to our security sector in the country, because women are now saying that, and even fathers are saying, my daughter cannot join the army or the police because of the way they're being treated, that side. So I think on the progress of women, peace and security agenda in my country, it's progressing, it's slow, because I think most of our efforts burn out. There is a way that they can I say mute it, or just underlay it, like push it under the rug, because they think women and girls, okay, what is it? We are the men, we can speak. So it's, but I'm not saying that it's not working. It's working, because women are still talking. Of recent, Crown the Woman as our organization, we went out for a march. An 8-year-old was raped. Imagine, gang raped an 8-year-old, and at last, at least we got justice, some type of justice. The perpetrator was sentenced, though we still feel that the sentence is low and lacking. We felt this is not right. She should be given like 10 years, and he was given only a year. And we feel this is not right. So our rights in this country and security of women and girls is still not being prioritized. It's still on the low. Yeah.
Thank you, Eunice, for this, for your perspective. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll move to Dr. Maria Al-Abdey, give her perspective on the progress.
Okay, thank you very much, Christine. So just before giving my perspective, I think we will need to put some context, because maybe not everybody is aware about the situation in Syria. So in 2011, everything started with peaceful revolution, asking for peace and democracy. We ended up today with a country that is completely devastated, with half of the population are either internally displaced or refugee. Where we started having a regime that is completely criminal toward its populations, to today we have multiple criminals. We have kind of international conflict going on within our country. So it is one reason why I'm still based in Germany, while for some countries, Syria today is a post-conflict country. So, but for us, we are still very much within a conflict when human rights are being violated in Syria every day. So this is a very important thing to explain before starting. And even now, Syria, unfortunately, we have so many militia today in Syria that even we have young Syrians who are participating in conflict in other countries. So today we are hearing about young minds joining fights in Libya or in Azerbaijan or in other countries, and which is very, very sad. And if we have listened to the woman 10 years ago who said, we want education for our children, we don't want them to join armed group and to become their profession, we would not have been here today. And it is my first reflection that when we are talking about the WPS and women participation, not too limited to the political process is also to understand the perspective and to listen to the perspective to the woman from the ground who knows what is going on and how things can go. So for a very long time in Syria, the WPS has been limited to, or women participation has been limited to women participation on the political process, the peace talk. However, today the peace talk have completely failed. And most of the effort of today are going through justice process, how to take the Syrian regime and other perpetrators today to court, to justice. So we have countries like Germany or other who have been being supported, very supportive on this. However, we just discovered that there is not enough women on justice process. When we are seeing who are the witnesses, who are the people who are taking, most of them are man or man-led organization, and no effort has been put before to include women, because women have always been seen as peace builder in a way that doesn't include justice, in a way that women have been seen always of the one who will forget, who will forget, who will, and yes, for sure, women can want the end of the conflict and are not the one who will choose, who will take a decision toward taking arms, but that doesn't mean that women cannot be part of the justice process. And today we need more women on the justice process. However, I think there is some good news we have seen during the last 2 years. One of them is raising of feminist fund, which is for me an excellent news. So we have seen more countries engaging with feminist-led organization, either local or international, and having international partners who have feminist value has been very, very important for us. When we have partners and donors, we discuss with them the problems. We find solution together, and it is not about numbers, it is not about, so I think increasing of feminist fund will be very important, and taking a priority on the quality, not the numbers, also is very important. I have seen also a more inclusive process during consultation on WPS, and Canada here have been very good, and the UK actually, in building inclusive process on consultation with translation, and I think this is very, very important. For me, and also we have been supported to produce our own knowledge, and I think it's a very, very also important thing for all women coming from conflict is to become the first knowledge producers. So I will invite here everybody also to go to our website and see our report, because it's also very important to listen to the voice of the women who have been through this and who are a real expert. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. And we'll come back to some of your points because they touch on another question. So thank you for that, and very important points. Cecilia, I give you the floor.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Cecilia Lazara. I'm from Argentina, and as mentioned, I work with the global network of Women Peacebuilders. First, I would like to thank the Women Peace and Security Network Canada for the invitation, as well as the government from Canada and Uruguay for your efforts to include civil society voices in the agenda. I'm going to make my remarks in English, but afterwards I may answer some questions in Spanish if necessary. So to begin with my reflections regarding the progress in the WPS agenda in Latin America, I think first it is important to recognize that global crises such as the one we are experiencing today provide us with the opportunity to stop and evaluate how we usually act as individuals and as social beings. This pandemic has impacted every single person in this world, but we have seen and experienced the disproportionate impact COVID-19 has had on women and girls. As an example, containment measures have aggravated domestic violence as women and girls are trapped with their abusers. In many places, national domestic violence hotlines are struggling to meet demand to provide the support needed for victims. In addition, it has highlighted the excessive burden of care that women carry on their shoulders to sustain their families, otherwise known as unpaid domestic labor. A peace builder from Colombia explained to me that in a way, she saw this pandemic as a regression and as a reinforcement of patriarchal values, since it forced women to return back to the domestic sphere, burdened with additional childcare, sick and elderly care, and schooling duties. Women activists find it challenging to continue their work and advocacy. Women peace builders around the world are warning us that the pandemic threatens the achievements of the women's movement and the WPS agenda. So we cannot afford to back down. In Latin America, women and youth peace builders have been at the forefront of the COVID-19 crisis response. For example, in Colombia, GNWP partners Red Nacional de Mujeres are collaborating with indigenous communities to distribute food packages and hygiene products. They have also continued their peace building work, monitoring peace agreement implementation and advocating for inclusion of gender responsive programs, provisions, in local development plans. Here, I will also like to specifically emphasize the role of young women. They have been very much involved throughout the responses, raising awareness in their communities and advocating for the integration of climate action in crisis response and recovery. So as I said, I think it's also an opportunity to promote this synergy between the WPS and YPS agendas by building on the leadership of youth and supporting their initiatives. Moreover, I would like to add that in Latin America, specifically, over 12,000 women are killed every year. The region is plagued by high levels of violence. For instance, in Argentina, a woman is killed every 32 hours and thousands suffer from daily violence before being murdered. There is a persistent gap in the engagement with the WPS agenda. You can see that only 7 countries in the region adopted national action plans: El Salvador, Guatemala, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, and most recently Uruguay, which is developing its first national action plan. So it's necessary to bring the WPS agenda closer to these countries. It's necessary to bring it closer to the countries that are not directly engaged with armed conflict also. And include non-traditional conflict themes that are relevant to addressing gender equality, like, for instance, domestic violence or access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. This will empower women and civil society organizations and offer them a normative framework to pressure governments, gather resources, and defend their rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. Maybe we can start with you for the next question and move on, because I'm conscious of time as well. So all panelists mentioned the engagement of women and the participation of the engagement of women peace builders and the participation of women, but also the difficulty and the lack of engagement of women on the ground. And so in your view, how can global leaders take more of a proactive role in engaging diverse women peace builders and also pushing for that engagement by others?
Thank you for that question. So first, I think that member states, international actors, and civil society must commit to implement a feminist response and recovery. This should be done by supporting local women's rights and peace building organizations. We've seen that women and youth peace builders play a critical role in preventing and mitigating the negative effects that war or crisis pandemic caused and still causes to women and girls. Women and young women peace builders are the ones who understand the needs of their local communities and fight for a sustainable and inclusive peace, although they often face increased threats and barriers to their work. So investment in women and youth-led response and recovery is key to implementing gender-responsive, conflict and crisis-sensitive interventions. Second, we must make sure that women and youth peace builders are included in decision-making about response and recovery. Despite all their contributions, we often see that they are still marginalized and excluded. Hence, we must ensure that they have a meaningful participation in the development, design, and implementation of humanitarian response and overall decision-making on crisis prevention and management and recovery. It is also important to integrate an intersectional gender analysis that recognizes all forms of diversity within a society. Although sometimes it might be easier to use a one-size-fits-all approach, especially given the high levels of uncertainty that the future presents, the recommendations should be localized and adapted to the particular dynamics of each territory. For an appropriate recovery, we must also ensure gender-sensitive and age-appropriate education for women and girls in emergencies. And third, I think it's also necessary to include investment in access to technology and closing of the digital gap as part of WPS funding. Only 55% of the household globally and only 19% of households in the least developed countries have access to internet. Moreover, women are 23% less likely than men to use mobile internet. COVID has emphasized the importance of digital connections and also exposed the digital gender gap that persists in today's world, both globally and locally, highlighting, for instance, the inequalities between rural and urban areas. So it is critical to expand women's access to internet, cell phone, airtime, and computers. This will help ensure that women and girls have access to platforms in which their voices can be heard at all levels. At the same time, however, the UN and member states should not forget to guarantee protective mechanisms, in particular to women human rights defenders and social leaders, since digital platforms can also play a key role in promoting intimidation and violence.
Thank you, Cecilia. We'll move on to Maria. Again, the same question. I know that you mentioned some of this in your previous answers, so I'll give you the floor in terms of how can global leaders take a more proactive role in engaging diverse women peace builders?
In addition of what I have said, I think I would just want to repeat everything Cecilia have said. So yeah, I totally agree with everything she mentioned on localization, on protection, on So just to go to other points, I think there is sometimes some logistic, very easy point, as I said. Sometimes it is translation, sometimes it is visa issue that also need to be taken into account. Not to take only the English speaker, the one who have visas, the one who have access. Also, we should, I think one thing we have learned through the Syrian conflict is trying to avoid the elite reproduction, which means that also always connecting with the one who is from the elite, who is more exposed to or highlight as expert. So I think that is also an important point. And as I said previously, take the woman priority on the ground. We have seen a lot of work, for example, in terms of SGBV, but that never was responding to the reality of the women who need documents, for example, who we have heard a lot of things about accountability on SGBV at international level. But for women who have been, who survived such experience during the conflict, we find that they have multiple level of priorities before accountability. So that is it from my side for now.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may, sorry, if
Yes,
I may
yes,
add
no, go
also,
ahead.
engage really with victims and survival groups, because we have seen a lot of women from organizing in kind of survival of victims group or other kind of group in Syria. And I think it's very important also to reach out to informal group such as this group.
Thank you, Maria. Eunice, if you'd like to turn on your video as well, great. So yes, the floor is yours, or the
Yeah,
virtual space is yours.
thank you. My first, repeat the question, sorry.
Yes, for sure. This was really about, I mean, you mentioned in your first, in your reflections about the engagement of civil society and how civil society was so, was key in pushing the agenda forward. So
Yeah.
this is really about how global leaders can be more proactive in engaging diverse women peace builders, and also in how global leaders can support and push for greater engagement of diverse women peace builders.
Okay. I will start by saying that to the global leaders and political leaders or any other leader to support the engagement of women to participate in every level of governance. I think the first thing is to empower the women, because without empowerment, a woman will feel less. She will not feel empowered enough to stand for her own or stand for her own rights and speak out. So I think supporting women initiatives, supporting women empowerment, this makes them have the flow to make decisions. And when you make a decision or have ownership as a woman, you will be able to stand up for your own and speak up and demand for your own rights. So I think this is one of the things that they can adapt, so that to engage women and other women in every peace process. And because of this engagement, I think it will reduce on the SGBV, on the cases of SGBV, because if a woman is empowered and she has the right, she can easily negotiate for her. She can easily negotiate for her. She will easily negotiate for her own sexual rights. So I think empowering the women, first of all, is one of my biggest points, and also having platforms for women to easily access information. As one of the speakers said, most of the women do not have access to information. That means they don't have smartphones or networks or internet. So because we are reaching to women in the grassroots, women in the villages, women deep down that do not know anything. So it creating a platform and creating awareness, going to the women in these communities, talking to them, to even let them know what this is all about. For example, in my project, with the young women, especially the girls are beyond like 18 to 25, we go to the community and have a community dialogue with the community, speak to them, tell them about the peace process from chapter 1 up to chapter 8, what entails, which gaps are there for women to join, how many women are being represented, are they young women or they're older women, so that we can bridge that gap and make sure that women participate in all aspects of life. So I think my strongest, because the rest that have all said it, is engaging and empowering young women. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Eunice. So we'll finish. I know that the time is extremely short, but we do have time for questions after we present an overview of the report. So for those who are watching, please do submit your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. There's a specific area for Q&A. So we'll finish with a short Well, with a big question, but hopefully a short answer, if you can. So we know that there are many important priorities going forward. But if you had to choose, what do you think would be, your biggest priority for the Women, Peace and Security agenda in 2021? So if you had to choose one of, your main priority for 2021, understanding that it may be extremely difficult to do so. So, if you can't, you can't. But yes, so going forward, 2021, one of the main priority for you. So maybe I'll start with Maria.
Okay, in 2 words, I would say localization and access. Access in the meaning that we need to go and find the women, especially in countries like Syria, that we have sanctions, we have a lot of things. So we need the partners and donors to take the risk with the women and go toward them to support them to be part of any process.
Thank you. Cecilia.
Okay, I'm going to try to summarize. So the agenda for 2021 will be defined by the COVID recovery. Therefore, as I said, I would like to think about this crisis as an opportunity for the society, governments, and international community to acknowledge the structural inequalities women continually face in their daily lives. Women's care work is rarely recognized, although they are often the main or only caretakers and breadwinners for their families, especially in conflict-affected countries. They also care for their communities as peace builders, conflict mediators, and first responders in crisis. As we see, the pandemic offers us an opportunity to change this and place women's care and peace building work at the center of discussions on public policies. We need to take advantage of this particular momentum to raise our voices. Policymakers must recognize the value of what has been considered as natural female task throughout history and promote gender equality.
Thank you, Cecilia. Eunice. You're mute. Don't forget your mute button.
Sorry, sorry for muting myself. I think my main priority for the agenda for 2021 for women, peace and security in my country and in the region at large, I would really emphasize and put more emphasis and would like the Women, Peace and Security to put more emphasis on empowering women and also trying hard to end sexual gender-based violence in our region, because with the cases and everything that is coming up with the COVID, with the cases we're receiving, they are increasing each and every day. These are like my priorities, the top two. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank all of you for this very rich perspective, for these very rich perspectives, and for taking the time as well to take part in these discussions and provide your rich and perspective and inputs. And as mentioned, we will have time for some questions a little bit afterwards, but I will thank you again, and I will turn it back to Michelle to continue in terms of our morning, or in terms of our webinar.
Thanks,
Over
Christine.
to you.
Thanks so much. And thanks again to our panelists. I'm always just so humbled and inspired when I hear from women who every day are working towards peace and security in their countries and their regions. So Thanks again for sharing those perspectives. And I wish we had more time, but I'm glad that we were able to get your perspectives in our consultations and that we were able to reflect them in our report with our recommendations. So with that in mind, I wanted to now turn it over to Muzna Durid. She has been working with us at the Women, Peace and Security Network Canada to help us put together the consultations and the report. And it is my pleasure to let her share some of the recommendations. Muzna is a master's student of public administration and public policy at Concordia University. And she also is an activist in the WPS space. She is the youth general secretary and a member of the Syrian Women's Political Movement, acting as a liaison, and I think has played a really important role in advocacy in Canada and in supporting the Syrian women's movement as well. So Muzna, I'll turn it over to you to share some of the summaries from the report that we put together.
Thank you, Michelle. Welcome, bienvenue, bienvenida. I'm talking from the territory of Copenhagen, and thank you, Uruguay, Canada, and Ambassador Jackie to joining us today. Women, Peace and Security Network Canada grateful to acknowledge the input provided by civil society experts through our online consultations who took the time to share their insights and experience with us, without whom this report wouldn't have been possible. I'm gonna give you like an overview of the recommendation from the consultation. So we're gonna start first by bringing the Women, Peace and Security agenda into the COVID-19 response. One of the key issues highlighted by feminist activists in the importance of the care economy, care responsibility in home, in health sector, and elsewhere should be recognized and supported in COVID-19 response. Several participants highlighted the importance of addressing the rights of domestic workers. Support local decentralized initiatives to produce personal protective equipment, PPE, including fabric or surgical mask within marginalized communities. Ensure that women, peace and security continue even during the pandemic. Attack on women rights defenders and feminist activists have increased in many contexts. Participants noted that they have been told by funders that the priority is COVID-19 response rather than women, peace and security. Participants pointed out that the implementation of peace agreements has slowed during the pandemic. The Women, Peace and Security agenda remains urgent and cannot be sidelined during the pandemic. Two issues can be addressed simultaneously rather than seen as competing priorities. 2020 was supposed to be a year of celebration with the 25th anniversary of Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action, and the 20 anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. With the pandemic, so many initiatives are now cancelled or postponed. The momentum of the 20th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 this October should be not lost. Participants noted many examples where local women were excluded from meetings and consultations because they didn't have access to the internet or devices. Take actions to protect political prisoners by asking to release the political detainees, women rights defenders, and women peacebuilders prisoners. In many countries, political prisoners face increasing danger with the pandemic, and international access is often restricted. We urge for immediate access to international community, for the Red Cross to the detention centers to ensure that health circumstances are adequate during and after the outbreak. Third, work towards an inclusive and intersectional women, peace and security agenda. Participants noted that women are often seen as experts are often not seen as experts when it comes to security. A training on unconscious bias that looks at intersectional issues, ability, race, etc., could be used as a tool by policymakers. Work to bring the youth, peace, and security agenda together with the women, peace, and security. Do not set this up as a competing agendas. There is a great need and importance to include young women, young youth peace builders, yet they are also doing important work. Several participants noted that young women are organizing in new ways, including the online spaces. Avoid sending funding and humanitarian aid through corrupt governments in active conflict areas, and increase the funding to local civil society and non-governmental organizations. Prevent impunity and support the accountability for gender-based violence survivors by international justice avenues for exiled and local women peace builders to ensure sustainable peace. One example is universal jurisdiction, which allows states or international organizations to claim criminal jurisdiction over an accused person. This allows refugee women also to hold perpetrators. Fourth, take action to prevent cybercrime and summer campaign against women peace builders. Support collecting evidence of gender-based violence crimes by third-party institutions such as the UN International Impartial and Independent Mechanism to assist in the investigation and prosecution of criminals. Fourth, improve data and information on women, peace, and security issues. Despite the decades of work on women, peace, and security issues, collecting data remains a challenge. New initiatives such as the Women, Peace, and Security Index are welcome. However, gaps continue. Better data are needed to make evidence-based policy choices. Fifth, address the ongoing deficit for women, peace, and security work. Ensure that the upcoming generation equality process and the compact on women, peace, and security and humanitarian action is well funded, including ensuring meaningful participation by diverse women, girls, and gender diverse people, with a focus on those working at local level. Sixth, include the robust response to displaced and migrant, to displacement and migration issues in the women, peace, and security agenda. Develop rapid and comprehensive response to protect women rights defenders and LGBTQ defenders who are displaced by armed conflict. Various mechanisms such as rapid relocation, intervention by embassies and high commissions, and issues like a protection visa for them. Include refugee and IDP women in the development COVID-19 recovery plan and vaccine distribution. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Musna. The report, we did try to put together a lot of really great recommendations. So you'll see in the report, and I know that Monique did put the link in the chat, so we welcome everyone to look at the report and check it out, share it across your networks. I think a lot of these recommendations are important for the immediate COVID response, as Musna discussed, but also going forward in a longer term recovery. There are a lot of opportunities in this crisis for change. And so that's where I think we also wanted to emphasize that including women is one of those important pieces that can catalyze change. So thanks so much, Musna. Now we're going to move to our Q&A section, and I'll try to move us along so that we stick with our time. But our first question is actually to all of the participants. We would like to know where you're from and sort of what sector you represent if you're joining us here. So you'll see a poll on your screen. So please feel free to let us know how you would describe your affiliation or which group you represent. So thanks so much. And I noticed in our chat, and I do encourage everyone to continue putting their questions in the chat box, but we had a few really interesting questions. They're big questions, and I'm glad that they're asked, so hopefully we can get some responses from them. I'll start with the question from Rocio, and it is, I think, for all of our speakers, so including Gwen and Noelia as well. What do you think are the most successful experiences or the most successes that we've had in the past 20 years since the 1325 resolution? So I'll let any of our speakers answer. So feel free to unmute yourself, panelists, if you'd like to respond. What do you think is the biggest success that we've had? Maybe I'll call on Maria because I see your videos on.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to comment on the recommendation, so maybe this is the opportunity to do both, answer the question and comment. So, yeah, I cannot tell from 20 years. I have been here during the Syrian conflict since the last 10 years. As I said before, I think having this discussion was something that, for me, it's a little kind of new. So I think this is a big success. This is a big success when we are trying really to understand the perspective of the woman. And yeah, so I think this is a very, very important process. Also, the Feminist Fund for me is, it is not only considered to be WPS, it's more global, but also for the WPS agenda, having Feminist Solidarity Fund is a big success for me. And here I just wanted, if I have 1 more minute, just to comment on the recommendations, because I think something very important that the report mentioned was and I mentioned it very quickly on my comments, was how to transfer fund when we have corrupt state or even criminal state. And I think really I need to urge here all the donor country to understand the risk of the local groups. So they need to take the risk with them, even if it's more work for them. But asking for organization to channel big amount of money, that means that small effective organization will not be able to reach the money. It will only go to the huge, big international organization or to UN agency, with all the respect to their work. But however, the main target, the main effective will not be reached out.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks for that, and that reminder to especially the taking on the risk to localize our efforts. Gwen, I see you have your video on, so I'd love to hear some of your insights on what do you think are some of the biggest successes.
Very briefly, I think that there are 2 big trends which represent success for the agenda. The first is the organization of women, the networking, the building up of contacts, of strategic partnerships, because I think that it's, you know, not surprisingly, women who are taking this agenda forward with some support from allies, but really the burden has been on women, and they've organized politically, organizationally in order to do it. So I think that that's where the real power for moving the agenda forward has come. The second big trend and success of the agenda, I think, has been moving the context from beyond the narrow framework of armed conflict settings. So we now see an expanded concept of peace and security to include things like violence within countries, within the home, and that sort of insecurity and violence affects us all. But some groups more specifically, in Canada, I would point to the special circumstances of our Indigenous women and girls, as well as some other racialized communities. So I see a changing definition of peace and security, which I think is beneficial to us all. On the recommendations, really, really rich, fantastic. It's quite helpful from a government perspective when we see such a broad expanse of recommendations, to have your support and perspective from civil society to identify a couple of things. One is, which are those recommendations which are really the game changers? So what do we front load or put the greatest emphasis on first, appreciating that we have to make choices. And so having your perspective on what's the most important, what needs to go first. Those aren't always the same things. And of course, quick wins are always very welcome, and especially if there are very concrete actions that we can recommend to different levels of our organizations, whether it be to our heads of mission abroad, whether it be to our program analysts, whether it be to our policymakers. So having things in bite-sized chunks and a relative sense of what needs to go first is really important, because those are the kinds of choices that we have to face from inside government. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gwen. It's so good to hear the perspective from government on this, and to know that you're part of this engagement and really committed to it. So thank you. And we do welcome all the support we've received from Global Affairs for these consultations and the report. I wanted to move on to another question that Ruba sent, and I think she talked about justice for women, and in terms of justice from criminals in a domestic sense. But I think another main theme from that question is just about accountability in general, accountability within the domestic justice system, and also in a sort of a more global context. So my question then that I would take from that for our panelists is, what do you think is, or how are you trying to hold the justice system to account, trying to hold decision makers to account in your country or in your context? So let's see, Maria, do you have a response, please?
Yeah, sorry, I will start because I think Ruba is a dear colleague from the Syrian context, so I think I totally understand what she means, and I think it is related to my first point when I said a lot of effort has been taken to include women in the peace process, but when we are coming to justice process, we found that there is not enough support for women being part. And as mentioned by the recommendation of the report on women access to justice and universal jurisprudence, I think it's also very important to know that women access to accountability is not only is limited by so different ways, and we need to take them all into considerations. For example, women within the conflict cannot access justice. Even Musna mentioned it. It is justice for refugee women. Women who are still living under the conflict will not have access to justice because it is not happening within the country. It is using other jurisprudence, other international one, to reach the war criminal. So that is a very important point, and so we need definitely to have more support of WPS on women access in investing, but also in elevating all the challenges. Like as I mentioned, the one woman within the country, that maybe it's very difficult, but we need to think about it, and also understand women perspective of justice. Some women has been obliged to flee, to leave everything. Their family doesn't recognize them anymore because they have been victim of rape, for example. They don't have any access to documents, and this should be a priority. Is also how we support women's survival of SGBV in different way, as well as protect them. I think it is also another priority when we are talking about women access to justice. Sorry, I didn't answer your question, but I think I answered and supported Rubawan.
No, thank you so much, Maria. I do think that justice and accountability is such an important, it's how we operationalize the agenda locally. So maybe I'll turn it over to Eunice or Cecilia for another last comment, and then we'll move on to our wrap up. So Eunice or Cecilia, do either of you have anything you want to say? Cecilia, go ahead.
Yes. Eunice here. In my context, in my country's context, how we have been holding the justice accountable. We're supposed actually to have a court, a GBV court, that is to try all these cases, but it is there, but it's not functioning. Why it's not functioning? Because of issues like that. There is no money and everything. But we have judges that are standing up for these cases. We have young women justices, advocates, lawyers that are doing this and are the ones that tried the cases of recent of the rape of cases, the rape cases we have been having in my country. And the other thing that we are holding the government accountable for and can make the government also know that the young women are there, they're speaking, is we have silent marches. We have marches, we write up policy briefs, we write up communiques, we write letters, specific letters addressing specific issues to a specific person. Like, let's say we're going to write this to the Minister of Gender, targeting the GBV cases. What is she doing about GBV cases in the country? How are we all holding the perpetrators accountable? So we have been working on that in South Sudan, in Juba most especially, and I think it's bringing out an impact because people are now starting to realize, oh, there are laws that can really convict these people, but why are they not being effected or being implemented? And this is now creating awareness, and I'm glad that many people are coming up with stories and people are being prosecuted. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Eunice. And just really emphasizing the importance of local activists on the ground who are doing the grassroots accountability. Cecilia, I'll turn it over to you for a quick last word before we go to our wrap up.
Sure, I'll be fast. In regards to this question, I think here women peace building organizations are essential to hold government accountable. For instance, in the case of Colombia, they are the ones who have been monitoring the impact of COVID on peace negotiations and the peace agreement. So I would also like to mention that we observed in GNWP that the implementation plans of peace agreements have slowed down as governments are prioritizing their resources to tackle the pandemic. I think we need to call on the UN and member states to honor their commitment to the WPS agenda by strengthening their support to advance inclusive peace processes and ensure compliance with the gender provisions. So we further call on the UN and other international and regional actors to support the civil society in demanding greater accountability from governments to fulfill their obligations, particularly during these special times.
Thank you, Cecilia. Great note to end on as well. And I really valued that, the question and answer, and also hearing from all of you. We're moving into our wrap up now. So I'm going to turn it over to Canada's Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, Jackie O'Neill. And she has been a strong advocate for our sector in Canada, and I think a strong voice in bringing together people around the world. So Jackie, I'll turn it over to you for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everybody. And a big merci, gracias, shukran, and thanks to the Women, Peace and Security Network of Canada for organizing this. I'm often asked how Canada has ended up with some positive and some WPS-driven approaches and priorities and policies. And I want to say, have you met the Women, Peace and Security Network of Canada? They are a force, and every country needs one. So thank you for doing this. We're really delighted that you undertook this consultation. And as Gwen said, we think the recommendations are excellent. They're really, really rich. I think, as is often the case, it's clear that you've done a really international consultation and gotten very specific inputs from different regions. And there are just so many similarities with what's going on around the world, and the responses needed are not always dramatically different in every context. So while context matters, it's really powerful, as always, to see the similarities that we face. And also so glad that you've already gotten them translated into several languages, and hope to see many more. I was reminded, thinking about that Resolution 1325 is the most translated Security Council resolution ever. And I think that speaks to the commitment of women and civil society in particular to really make it accessible and relevant at community levels, and we just have to keep going there. So briefly, I just want to pick up on a few things that Muzna and the panelists said, especially as they relate to the recommendations. So Pachinko Yunus, you had a great phrase that it seems sometimes that women's work is muted. And I thought that was a very appropriate term for these Zoom days. I always laugh when, or sort of snicker, I guess, to myself when people say, we need to make sure that women have a voice. Women have a voice, they've always had it, we just sometimes aren't listening, we haven't created space for them to share it, or they're very actively muted, which has a new meaning, I think, in these times. And you spoke about the need, as every single one of you did, to engage diverse groups of women, so including young women, women with different intersecting identities. And I appreciated in the report how the recommendations basically had a plea to not just consult, but to make sure they're actually listened to. And we've all been calling for this for more than 20 years. And I really look forward to discussing some of the ways that we can have more accountability for these consultations. It's on my mind in particular. Right after this, I'm heading to the UN Peacebuilding Commission meeting, which Canada chairs, and they just did an evaluation on how well they're applying their gender strategy. And one of the recommendations was to track recommendations by civil society speakers in particular, and to do follow-up, to actually note what appears then in reports or plans and to get back to them. And it's such a seemingly basic concept, but I know one that isn't practiced that much. I mean, imagine getting consulted and then having the institution as a regular practice follow up with you on what you said and what input you provided. So I think we can talk a little bit more about all kinds of aspects of accountability. And Maria and Cecilia, you both talked about feminist responses. I thought that was great. You talked about both the tragedy of COVID-19, but each of you also used the word opportunity. And I think you covered so many ways that we have to seize the opportunities and the disruption that are presented by it. And I think just one of those, of course, is around data disaggregated data collection. And I think we have a moment across our governments because of the pandemic where people are understanding the importance of it a little more than they used to, if not a lot more. So not just how many women and men are being affected, but urban versus rural divides, high income, low income, how race and ethnicity and physical ability and sexual orientation really affect vulnerability and policy responses. And I hope we can seize on this momentum of intersectional data collection, in part to help us get at a range of things, including, as Maria called, elite reproduction, which is a term that I now love. And Maria and Cecilia, you also each talked about the digital gender gap, and I think that's so important to build funding related to WPS that addresses that. And so to close, I just want to say, Muzna, you talked about 2020 being the anniversary. I think collectively, we need to make this an anniversary year that starts in October of 2020. COVID has delayed all kinds of things. It's made travel virtually impossible. And, not just because of COVID, but the issue deserves a full year. So I think I agree completely. We don't want to lose momentum of the anniversary. Let's not try to force everything into October. Let's make this a year, a decade if we need to. And let's just not accept these zero-sum arguments that we have to focus on COVID or on women, peace, and security, or on youth, peace, and security, or on women, peace, and security. I think these trade-offs or perceived trade-offs are what happens when there are limited resources and we end up fighting and competing amongst ourselves for a scarce pot. And I think, again, as always, it's important that you came back to the key recommendations about reallocating spending overall away from militarized responses and towards more human security. So I'll end there, but I just want to thank you for the excellent recommendation and for everyone who organized today's event and this whole consultation process so effectively. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jackie. As always, a really great summary of today and what we heard. And I think a really clear path for what we can hope for in the coming months and year. So thank you for that. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to go through all of the questions, but we encourage everyone here to stay engaged. The Women, Peace and Security Network Canada has a website. We also are on Twitter. We have an Instagram. We have Facebook. You can surely connect with us there, and we can continue to have these conversations. And I think this is just one point for us to start moving together to advance the WPS agenda. So again, we invite everyone to look at the report that we have. And before we close, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to my fellow members of the WPSN. So in particular, Monique, Muzna, Christine, and Beth, who worked so hard in making sure that all of this happened, that we had the consultations, that we were able to produce the report. So thank you all. I think it was a great success. I wanted to thank all of our speakers for spending the time to share their thoughts with us today. It was so important for us to hear from you from both the government side and from the civil society side. Really allows us to have that engagement. And I think sets a really great example for what can be done and how we can even further deepen our engagement together. And then lastly, I did want to thank all of our participants today. Thank you for spending an hour and a half with us to hear from our speakers, to look at the report, to hear from the WPS Focal Points, and from Jackie. So thank you all of you for joining us today. And I hope that you'll take something from our recommendations as well. So thank you, everyone. I look forward to future engagements. We'll close the webinar now and have a great rest of your Friday.